I walked into the hospital, soaked in rain blood seeping through my sleeves, not mine, but my daughter's. My legs were shaking so hard I could barely stand. As the nurses rushed her away, I fumbled for my phone with trembling fingers. When my father picked up, I choked out the words, "Dad, I need you." He didn't hesitate. "You had her. You deal with her." Then he hung up. That was the moment everything inside me collapsed. I sat alone in the ER, drenched and shaking, watching strangers huddle in love while I unraveled in silence. No one came. No one called back. My daughter was fighting to live, and my own family had turned their backs. And just when I thought I couldn't breathe anymore, a man in a dark coat sat beside me, handed me a handkerchief, and said one thing, something that would change everything. The sliding doors whooshed closed behind me, sealing me into a world of fluorescent lights and antiseptic air. My daughter's tiny body was limp in my arms. Her blood soaked through my jacket, down my jeans, streaking red across my shoes like war paint. "Ma'am, you have to let her go now." A nurse's voice broke through my fog. I couldn't even answer. I just nodded, barely able to unclench my arms. They pried her away, placed her on a gurney, and wheeled her into a hallway I wasn't allowed to follow. And then I was alone. I stumbled back against a hard plastic chair in the waiting room. Arms empty closed soaked my breath, coming in broken gasps. The ER was full of movement. Doctors barking orders, phones ringing, families clustered in little circles of warmth. I was the only one frozen, untethered. I stared down at my shaking hands. Blood crusted beneath my fingernails. My phone buzzed again. For a moment, I felt hope. It was my mom. I answered. "Mom, it's bad. I need someone to sign off on the surgery. They won't start without a cosigner. Please, I'm begging you." Silence. Then a sigh so sharp it sliced me open. "You made your choices, Elaine." That tone flat cold like a door slamming shut. "You got yourself into this mess when you decided to be a single mother. You always thought you didn't need anyone, so go prove it." She hung up. I wanted to throw my phone across the room. Instead, I placed it face down on the chair next to me like a tombstone marking whatever was left of the word family. A nurse walked by with a clipboard. She didn't even glance at me. I folded in on myself. The cold from my wet clothes crept into my bones. Every breath hurt. I tried not to cry because I didn't want the world to see me break. I looked around the waiting room again. A father cradled his son. A woman whispered prayers into her mother's shoulder. A group of siblings shared a blanket. Everywhere I looked, there was love support, and I was just noise one to hear. I whispered under my breath, barely loud enough for anyone, even myself, to hear. "Please, someone, anyone, help me." My voice disappeared into the hum of the ER lights and the shuffle of shoes across linoleum. And that's when I felt it. A presence, a stillness in the seat beside me that hadn't been there before. I didn't look up yet. I didn't have the energy, but someone had sat down beside me. No words, no questions, just silence. And somehow that silence felt different. The silence between us stretched long and warm like a blanket someone had laid over a shivering body. I still hadn't looked up. My eyes were fixed on my shoes, on the dark spots where my daughter's blood had dried into the fabric. I braced myself for the usual questions. "Are you okay?" the ones people ask just to feel like they've done something before walking away. But the man beside me didn't speak. Not at first. Instead, he reached into his coat pocket and extended something toward me. A handkerchief. Not a flimsy tissue, but a soft white cotton square with crisp corners like something out of a different century. I blinked at it. He didn't push. He just waited. Finally, I took it with shaking hands. I pressed it to my face and felt tears sting my eyes. Not because someone had fixed anything, but because someone had finally seen me. He still hadn't moved. I stole a glance at him. Mid-50s, maybe. Sharp jawline, silver at the temples, dark wool coat expensive, but in that quiet, tailored way that rich people wear when they don't need to prove anything. His shoes were polished but not flashy. His eyes were focused straight ahead. "You look like someone who's done everything alone for far too long," he said, voice low and calm. I didn't answer. I didn't trust my voice not to crack. "Your daughter," he added gently. "Is she in surgery?" I nodded. "They told me I needed a cosigner," I said hoarsely. I called my parents. My father told me you had her, you deal with her. And then he hung up. He finally turned his head to look at me. And what I saw in his eyes wasn't pity, it was recognition. I've heard those words before, he said. That's when I noticed the small pin on his lapel. A silver bird in flight. I didn't know what it meant, but it gleamed under the cold lights, delicate yet solid like him. I'm Elaine, I murmured. He smiled just a little. Daniel Sutton. The name hit me like a soft jolt. I'd heard of him, Sutton Holdings, the tech mogul who disappeared from the media years ago after his daughter died in a tragic accident. But this man wasn't headlines. He was real. And for some reason, he was sitting beside me. I don't know what I'm doing, I whispered. Daniel didn't offer promises. He didn't offer to fix me. Instead, he said one sentence, 7 words that I would carry with me long after this night. You're not broken. You're just exhausted. Rest. And for the first time in what felt like years, I leaned back, not because everything was okay, but because someone else was still there. Time passed in a strange, watery blur. The ER's chaos continued around us, but I stayed rooted in that hard plastic chair. Daniel Sutton still beside me like a fixed point in a storm. At some point, a nurse approached, clipboard in hand, expression tight. Miss Elaine Walker. I stood up so fast I nearly tripped. Yes. Is she my daughter? There's internal bleeding. We need to act quickly, the nurse said, but she hesitated, glancing at the form in her hand. Your insurance has been declined. We need a co-signer before the surgical team can proceed. My stomach twisted. I'd already tried. I had no one left to call. To figure something out, I stammered. The nurse gave a practiced, professional nod. We can only wait a little longer. I'm sorry. She turned and walked away. I sank back down. And before I could speak, Daniel stood. I'll handle it, he said quietly. My head snapped toward him. What? He met my eyes calmly. I'll authorize the payment. I shot to my feet. No, you can't do that. You don't even know me. That's not true, he replied. I know exactly who you are. You're a mother doing everything in her power to keep her child alive. I don't need to know anything else. My throat tightened. I wanted to scream yes, to let someone else carry the burden even for a second. But pride, old and heavy and bruised, flared up like a reflex. I don't take charity, I said, voice shaking. Daniel didn't flinch. It's not charity. It's perspective. When my daughter was dying, I would have given anything for someone to step in and say, let me stand with you. My hands trembled. The handkerchief he'd given me was balled up in my fist, stained now with blood and tears. I can't owe you something like that. You already don't, he said gently. You're not weak for accepting help. You're human. I couldn't respond. My lips moved, but nothing came out. He placed a small embossed card on the armrest between us. My assistant is at the front desk. I'll authorize the surgery now. You can choose whether to sign the follow-up paperwork later or walk away completely. Then he stepped back, leaving me alone again. But this time the air felt different, like someone had cracked open a window in a room I thought was sealed shut. I stared at his name on the card, Daniel Sutton. I didn't know what to believe. I didn't know if I could trust any of this. But I knew one thing for certain. If I walked back into that waiting room and Nora didn't make it because of my pride, I'd never forgive myself. The surgery began 20 minutes later. I signed what I could with hands that still trembled. The ink smudged on half the forms because I couldn't stop shaking. Daniel didn't return, but the nurse told me the payment had been secured. Mr. Sutton's team handled everything, she said with a strange mix of awe and disbelief. I didn't feel relief. I felt exposed, as if accepting help had peeled away the last layer of protection I had against my family's judgment. I sat alone in the same chair, staring at the space Daniel had occupied. His handkerchief was still in my lap. It smelled faintly of cologne and something older, deeper, like cedarwood in winter. I clutched it like a rope tied to something steady. Then my phone vibrated. Voicemail. Mom. I hesitated, then pressed play. So now you're begging strangers for help. How pathetic. If you think taking money from a billionaire means you're some kind of martyr, think again. You are a disgrace to this family, Elaine. And if you go through with this, don't bother coming back. I stared at the screen, pulse pounding. Another message came in. Dad, you had the kid. You raise her. You deal with her. And don't expect us to clean up the mess when he dumps you, because people like that don't do charity. They collect favors. So congrats, you just sold your pride. I dropped the phone in my lap. The tears didn't come this time. Not out of numbness, but clarity. They were never going to be proud of me. Not if I cured cancer. Not if I raised Nora into the kindest soul on earth. Not if I crawled back with a Nobel Prize in one hand and an apology in the other. To them, I would always be the mistake who didn't listen. I stared at the ER floor, feeling the hum of my heartbeat slow settle. That's when Daniel returned, not with fanfare or promises, just 2 cups of bad vending machine coffee. He handed me one without a word. I didn't thank him, not yet. Instead, I asked, "Why are you still here?" He looked at me for a long moment and then said, "Because I remember what it felt like to sit in that chair and feel like no one would." He didn't pry, didn't ask about the voicemails or the bruises I'd hidden so long. They felt like bone. He just sat beside me again, the coffee steaming gently between us. And in that moment, I realized something. Kindness doesn't always look like rescue. Sometimes it looks like company. Sometimes that's more powerful than any signature on a check. The hours bled into each other like rain against glass. I don't know how long I sat there, just that the coffee Daniel gave me went cold, untouched in my hands. Then a nurse appeared at the edge of my vision. Her face was unreadable, but her tone was soft. "She's stable out of surgery. She'll sleep for a while." I nodded, breath catching in my chest, too fragile to celebrate, too raw to exhale. Daniel stood beside me and whispered, "You did it." But I didn't feel like I had. I felt like Nora had done it, fought through something bigger than either of us. We followed the nurse down the hallway. The second I saw her, so small in that big hospital bed, monitors beeping around her like a mechanical lullaby, my knees nearly buckled. I took her hand in mine, and she stirred just slightly. I bent down and whispered, "I'm here, baby. I'm not going anywhere." But peace didn't last long. My phone lit up again this time, a new message from my older sister, Rachel. "Mom says, you're putting Nora in danger. She's calling CPS. You should have asked for help the right way instead of making us look like monsters. This is your last warning." The air left my lungs. My hand tightened around Nora's. Calling CPS. I felt Daniel's gaze from across the room. He didn't ask what happened. I must have gone pale. Or maybe I swayed a little, but he stepped forward and gently guided me to a chair. I showed him the message. His jaw tightened just slightly. "They're not just trying to humiliate me," I whispered. "They want to take her because they don't believe you'll fight back," he said. "But they're wrong." I stared at him. "I don't have a lawyer. I don't have money. They'll twist everything, the hospital bills, the help I took from you, into something ugly." Daniel reached into his coat, pulled out a folded slip of paper, and placed it in my hand. "Call this number. First thing in the morning, her name is Veronica Chu, one of the best family attorneys in the state. Tell her I sent you." I didn't know what to say. The only thing that came out was, "Why are you doing this?" He looked toward Nora's bed, because once someone I loved needed a miracle and no one came. He turned back to me. "You remind me of her. The fight in your eyes. The way you protect her." I looked down at the paper in my hand, a lifeline folded between my fingers. Outside the window, morning was beginning to break. And so was something inside me. Not fear this time, but fire. 3 days later, I stood outside the Denver family courthouse. The wind bit through my coat, but I barely felt it. In my hands, I held a folder neatly organized by Veronica Chu, the lawyer Daniel insisted I call. Beside me, Veronica stood like a wall in heels, sharp eyes scanning every detail. Daniel hadn't come. He said this was my moment. And somehow that meant more. When we entered the courtroom, I saw them. My mother in her navy PC coat, hair tightly pinned. My father, arms crossed, jaw tight, pretending not to see me. Rachel clutching a file so tight her knuckles turned white. They looked polished, prepared. They weren't here to reconcile. They were here to erase me. The hearing began with their lawyer painting a cold portrait. Elaine Walker, emotionally unstable, financially dependent on strangers, with a history of neglectful decision-making. They claimed I had no income, no housing stability, no family support. I sat silent, fingers gripping the edge of the table. Then they played their trump card, a guardianship paper I had signed years ago, temporarily naming Rachel as Nora's caretaker during a week I'd been hospitalized for exhaustion. It felt like a knife, but Veronica didn't flinch. She stood cool and steady and handed the judge a stack of documents, proof of my employment bank records, even a notarized letter from the hospital verifying I had never abandoned Nora, not even once. Then she nodded to me. My heart pounded as I stood. "I have something to play," I said, holding up my phone. The judge gave a slight nod. And then, in the silence of the courtroom, my mother's voice filled the space. "You had her. You deal with her." Next, my sister's message. "Mom says, you're putting Nora in danger. She's calling CPS. This is your last warning." I watched their faces change, pale, stiff, like glass cracking under heat. Veronica stepped forward again. "These are not the words of a family concerned for a child. These are threats, coercion, control." Then she stepped aside. The judge looked at me. "Do you have anything else to say, Miss Walker?" I nodded even as my hands trembled. "I've made mistakes. I've been tired, broke, terrified, but I have never abandoned my daughter. Not in surgery, not in sickness, not in court, and I never will." My mother stood up, voice rising. "You selfish, ungrateful." The judge slammed his gavel. Silence in the courtroom, and just like that, it was over. An hour later, outside in the hall, the judge's ruling echoed in my ears. Custody remains with the mother. All allegations are dismissed. Court recommends no further contact until reviewed. I stepped into the afternoon light. My family didn't follow. Veronica placed the folder in my hands and whispered, "You didn't just survive that. You won." And then from across the plaza, I saw him. Daniel Sutton. Not in a suit, no entourage, just standing quietly watching. I walked over. "She's safe," I said. He nodded. "So are you." There were no cameras, no announcements, just a quiet moment between two people who knew what it meant to sit in the dark and finally feel seen. We returned home that evening, if you could call it that. The apartment was small second-floor walk-up with scuffed floors and a heater that wheezed more than it warmed. But when I opened the door and Nora stepped inside, holding my hand tighter than ever, it felt like a sanctuary. No more voicemails, no more threats, just silence and space to breathe. Nora looked around and smiled. "Are we safe now, Mommy?" I knelt down, brushing her bangs aside. "We are baby. We're safe now." That night, while she slept curled up with her stuffed giraffe, I cleaned out the old drawer where I used to keep unopened bills and letters I was too scared to face. I tossed them all into a paper bag. It was time to let go of the ghosts. Then from my coat pocket, I pulled out the handkerchief Daniel had given me. It was wrinkled soft and still smelled faintly of cedar and rain. I laid it on the kitchen shelf beside Nora's art supplies and the chipped mug that held our spoons like a quiet monument. A reminder that someone once sat beside me when no one else did. The next morning, the sun poured through the cracked blinds. Nora twirled in the living room wearing her favorite pink socks. Her giggles filled the space like music, and my phone buzzed. A new message from a blocked number. "You humiliated this family. You think this is over, Elaine? It's not." I stared at the screen for a long moment. Then I calmly hit block. No more fear. Instead, I opened another message. This one from Daniel's assistant. It was an invitation, a small round meeting for community leaders and child advocacy funders. "Mr. Sutton would like you to attend as a guest and speaker if you're willing." I blinked at the screen. Me a speaker. I looked over at Nora still dancing. I thought of all the nights I stayed up sobbing in the dark, feeling like nothing, like less than nothing. And then I thought of the courtroom of my voice echoing clear across polished wood, telling the truth without apology. Maybe I wasn't meant to stay silent anymore. I sat down at the tiny kitchen table, pulled out a blank notebook, and began to write. Not for the court, not for my parents, for me. For the story I had survived, for the woman I was finally becoming. 2 weeks later, I stood at a podium I never imagined I'd deserve. It wasn't grand, just a community center auditorium with folding chairs and lukewarm coffee. But to me, it might as well have been Madison Square Garden. The name tag on my chest read, Elaine Walker Advocate, Single Mother Survivor. My palms were damp, my throat tight. Daniel sat in the back row, quiet, unreadable, but present. Always present. When it was my turn, I walked to the microphone with Nora's bracelet around my wrist, the one she made in the hospital playroom with plastic beads that spelled hero. I spoke not like a lawyer, not like someone trying to prove anything, just like a woman who had lived through the fire and come out carrying someone else. I was abandoned at a hospital while my daughter fought for her life. The people who were supposed to love me chose shame over support, but someone I didn't know, someone who owed me nothing, chose kindness. He didn't save me. He reminded me I was worth saving. I looked out at the crowd. Some people wiped their eyes, others nodded quietly like they knew, because they did. Because too many women had sat in cold chairs alone, hearing nothing but the echo of you. Did this to yourself? I ended with, we don't always get to choose our families, but we do get to choose what kind of ancestors we become. For my daughter, I chose better. And for myself, I finally did too. Applause rose like a soft wave. Not explosive, but steady. Earned. Afterward, Nora ran up to the podium and threw her arms around me. Mommy, you talked like a superhero. I laughed through my tears. Only because you gave me my powers. Daniel approached as the crowd dispersed. He held out an envelope. I hesitated. It's not money. He smiled. It's a contract. I've been looking for someone to help run a new initiative, support services for women like you. You've got the story, the strength, and now the voice. I blinked at him. Why me? His answer was simple. Because you didn't break. And because you make other people believe they don't have to either. I looked down at Nora, her eyes wide, her fingers tight around mine. I said yes. That evening, as we walked home, Nora skipped ahead on the sidewalk. The wind tangling her hair, her laughter trailing behind like a ribbon. We passed the hospital. I paused not out of fear, but to mark the place where everything had fallen apart and where everything else had begun. We kept walking past old memories toward new ones, toward something that wasn't just survival anymore. It was a life. Powers.